A racist passenger assaults a black rideshare driver, but he didn't expect who was in the back seat. What happens when blind prejudice meets unexpected justice? On a rainy Wednesday evening, February 19th, 2025 in New York City, Michael, a 35-year-old rideshare driver, accepted a ride that would change his life forever. The sky was heavy with the promise of a storm, but nothing compared to the tempest that was about to erupt in his car. If you're watching this story, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and comment which city you're watching from. Your participation is essential for us to keep bringing you this type of content. Michael, a hard-working black man and father of two, had just accepted a ride in the Upper East Side, an affluent neighborhood in Manhattan. Upon arrival, two passengers got in, a middle-aged man dressed in an expensive suit and a younger woman quietly seated in the back. The man, visibly intoxicated, began making derogatory comments as soon as he entered the car. "I can't believe they sent me a driver like this," he muttered, casting disdainful glances at Michael in the rearview mirror. Michael, accustomed to handling all types of passengers, remained calm and politely asked, "Is there a problem, sir? Can I help you with anything?" The response came like a slap. "The problem is you being here, driving this car. People like you should be doing other types of work." The tension in the vehicle was palpable. The woman in the back seat remained silent, but her eyes revealed a mixture of shock and indignation. Michael felt his heart race, torn between the need to defend himself and the fear of losing his job. As traffic became heavier on Fifth Avenue, the man continued his hateful discourse, each word more venomous than the last. Michael gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to focus on the road and ignore the insults. That's when something unexpected happened. The woman in the back seat, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. Her voice, firm and authoritative, cut through the air like a razor. "Sir, I think you'd better stop immediately." The man, surprised by the interruption, turned to face her. His face paled as he recognized her. Who was this woman? Why had her presence caused such a radical change in the racist passenger's behavior? Michael, observing the scene in the rearview mirror, realized that the dynamics in the car had completely changed. The air was charged with a different energy, a mixture of fear and anticipation. The rain began to fall heavily, as if the sky wanted to wash away the filth of the words spoken moments ago. The drops furiously hit the car windows, creating a curtain of water that isolated the occupants from the outside world. At that moment, Michael understood that his ordinary work evening had transformed into something much bigger. A story of prejudice, power, and justice was about to unfold, and he was at the center of it. Who was this mysterious passenger? What would happen next? And how would this night change the lives of all involved? The silence that followed was deafening. Michael, hands still firmly on the wheel, observed in the rearview mirror the silent confrontation between the two passengers. The woman, now identifiable as a figure of authority, emanated an aura of power that contrasted with her discreet appearance. As the car moved down Fifth Avenue, the city lights reflected in puddles, creating an almost dreamlike setting. Michael couldn't help but think about his journey. The son of a janitor and a factory worker, he had grown up in the Bronx. From an early age, he had learned that prejudice was a daily reality, but also that education was his best weapon. A graduate in business from a public university, Michael dreamed of starting his own company. In the meantime, driving for a rideshare platform was a way to provide for his family. He thought of Lisa, his wife, a high school teacher, and their children, Tyler and Zoe, aged 8 and 6. What would he tell them about this incident? How to explain that in 2025, racism was still an open wound in American society? The passenger, now visibly uncomfortable, was Richard Thompson, a businessman known in New York's elite circles. At 55, he had built an empire in real estate, but his reputation was tainted by accusations of dubious practices and discrimination. Tonight, he was coming from a boozy business dinner, which had exacerbated his already typically arrogant behavior. The woman in the back seat, whose presence had completely changed the dynamics of the situation, was Judge Amanda Chen, 40, recently appointed as the first Asian American woman to serve on the New York State Court of Appeals. Known for her firm stance on discrimination cases and human rights defense, Amanda was returning from a conference on racial equality when she decided to take a rideshare to unwind. Fate, ironic by nature, had brought these three very different individuals together in the same vehicle on a rainy February night. Michael, the resilient driver who faced prejudice daily; Richard, the businessman who personified privilege and deep-rooted prejudices in society; and Amanda, the embodiment of justice and the fight against discrimination. The streets of New York, with their mix of modern skyscrapers and historic buildings, passed by in a blur through the car windows. Each neighborhood seemed to carry the weight of the country's history of inequality and struggle. The Statue of Liberty, visible in the distance, stood majestically, reminding everyone of the dreams of a nation that prided itself on being a melting pot, but still stumbled over its own prejudices. As the car continued its journey, the three occupants were about to experience an encounter that would change their perspectives and perhaps the course of their lives. The air inside the vehicle was charged with tension, anticipation, and the promise of an imminent confrontation. Michael, looking in the rearview mirror again, realized that this wasn't just another ride. It was a microcosm of American society, with all its contradictions, injustices, and hopes. And he, who had always felt like a mere spectator, now found himself at the center of a story that could be the catalyst for a long overdue change. The rain continued to fall, washing the streets of New York, as if trying to clean not only the physical dirt, but also the moral stains of a society in conflict with itself. What would happen next would shape not only the fate of these three individuals, but could have repercussions far beyond this rainy night in America's largest metropolis. The tense silence was broken by Judge Amanda Chen's firm voice. "Mr. Thompson, your comments tonight are unacceptable. As a judge and a citizen, I cannot remain silent in the face of such discrimination." Richard Thompson, still stunned by the unexpected presence of the judge, tried to regain his composure. "Judge Chen, I had no idea you were there. I didn't mean to offend anyone. It was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Amanda's voice was sharp. "What we just heard is a blatant example of racism, Mr. Thompson. And as you well know, it's illegal." Michael, keeping his eyes on the road, felt his heart racing. He never imagined having a state court of appeals judge as an ally in such a delicate situation. Richard, realizing the gravity of the situation, changed tactics. "Look, I've had a tough day. I've had a bit too much to drink. Let's forget about all this, okay? I can compensate you." "Compensate us?" Michael couldn't contain his indignation. "You think you can just buy the right to humiliate people?" The rain intensified, and a clap of thunder resonated in the distance, as if nature itself was reacting to the tension inside the vehicle. Amanda leaned forward. "Mr. Michael, I'd like you to stop at the next police station. We're going to file a complaint." Richard paled. "No, please, it'll ruin my reputation. I have important business, a family. You should have thought about that before verbally assaulting Mr. Michael." Amanda replied coldly. Michael, conflicted, looked in the rearview mirror. "Judge Chen, I appreciate your intervention, but I don't know if I want to prolong this situation. I'm afraid of losing my job, of retaliation." Amanda nodded understandingly. "I understand your fear, Mr. Michael, but it's precisely because of this fear that people like Mr. Thompson continue to act this way. Impunity feeds prejudice." At that moment, Richard, desperate, tried to open the car door while it was moving. Michael, with his quick reflexes, activated the central locking. "Please, sir, that's dangerous." "You can't hold me here against my will," Richard shouted, panic evident in his voice. Amanda, keeping her calm, responded, "Actually, we're preventing you from doing something foolish. Driving under the influence is a crime, remember?" The traffic became more intense as they approached downtown. Michael spotted a police station a few blocks away. His mind was racing. Filing a complaint would mean facing a long process, possibly losing his job on the rideshare platform, facing retaliation. On the other hand, staying silent would mean being complicit in the racism he had always fought against. Richard, realizing they were approaching the police station, radically changed his tone. "Please, let's talk about this. I can offer an arrangement. Money, a better job for Mr. Michael, whatever you want." Amanda stared at Richard. "You really don't understand the gravity of what you've done, do you? This isn't about money or arrangements. It's about dignity, respect, and justice." Michael, his heart heavy, made his decision. He turned on his signal, preparing to pull into the police station. "Enough silence," he said, his voice trembling but determined. "If not for me, then for my children. I don't want them to grow up in a world where they have to accept this kind of treatment." As the car approached the police station, the tension reached its peak. Richard, desperate. Amanda, resolute. And Michael, nervous but determined. What would happen next would irrevocably change the lives of all three. The rain continued to fall, a silent witness to a moment that could be the turning point not only for these three people, but perhaps for many others who faced similar situations daily on the streets of New York and across America. As the car approached the police station, the lives of Michael, Richard, and Amanda intertwined in unexpected ways, revealing deeper layers of their personal histories. Michael, hands firm on the steering wheel, remembered his father. Years ago, he too had suffered discrimination at work, but had chosen to remain silent to keep his job. This decision had eaten him up inside, affecting his health and relationships. Michael had promised himself to be different, to fight against injustice. Now, faced with this situation, he felt the weight of that promise. Dad would be proud, he thought, a lump in his throat. In the back seat, Amanda observed the scene with a mixture of professional determination and personal empathy. Her mind wandered to the case she was examining in her office, a company accused of discriminatory hiring practices. By coincidence, it was one of Richard Thompson's companies. "Mr. Thompson," said Amanda, breaking the tense silence, "are you aware that your company is under investigation for racial discrimination in hiring?" Richard paled even more. "What? That's absurd!" "The numbers speak for themselves, Mr. Thompson. And now, your behavior tonight only confirms our suspicions about the company culture," Amanda replied, her voice calm but firm. Michael, surprised by this revelation, felt a new wave of indignation. How many people had been affected by this company's practices? Meanwhile, Richard's cell phone was ringing insistently. He looked at the screen, and his face twisted in anguish. It was his daughter, Emily. "May I answer?" "It's my daughter," he asked, his voice now devoid of all previous arrogance. Amanda nodded, and Richard answered the call. "Hello, sweetheart. No, Daddy's going to be a little late." "Yes, I know I promised to read you a story before bed. I'm sorry. Something came up." His voice broke. Hanging up, Richard looked like a defeated man. "My daughter, she's 7. She just learned about Rosa Parks in school. She'd be so disappointed if she knew." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael, listening to the conversation, felt a knot in his throat. He thought of his own children, of the difficult conversations he would have to have with them about racism, how to explain that the world wouldn't always be fair to them because of the color of their skin. Amanda, for her part, remembered her own journey. As the first Asian American woman to become a judge on the New York State Court of Appeals, she had faced countless obstacles. How many times had she been underestimated? How many doors had closed before she could prove her worth? The police station was now just a block away. The tension in the car was palpable. Suddenly, Michael made an unexpected turn, moving away from the police station. "What are you doing?" Amanda asked, surprised. Michael took a deep breath before answering. "I think we all have a lot to reflect on tonight. Mr. Thompson, you have a choice to make. You can use this experience to change, to be a better example for your daughter and your employees. Or you can continue down the same path and eventually face the legal consequences of your actions. Richard, visibly shaken, nodded slowly. I'm truly sorry. There's no excuse for what I said or did. Amanda observed the scene with a mixture of surprise and admiration. Mr. Michael, your compassion is admirable, but know that this doesn't diminish the gravity of Mr. Thompson's actions. I know, Michael replied, but sometimes the possibility of change is more powerful than immediate punishment. As the car continued through a New York now bathed in moonlight peeking through the clouds, the three occupants reflected on the complexities of forgiveness, justice, and personal transformation. The night wasn't over yet, and fate still had surprises in store for each of them. The car continued down Fifth Avenue, now less crowded due to the late hour. The rain had turned into a fine drizzle, typical of New York. The silence inside the vehicle was heavy, charged with reflections and contained emotions. Suddenly, Michael's phone rang, breaking the quiet. He glanced quickly at the device on its mount, and his face paled. "It's the hospital," he murmured, his voice trembling. Amanda, perceiving the driver's anguish, said, "Answer, please. I can hold the wheel if necessary." With shaking hands, Michael activated the speakerphone. "Hello? Mr. Michael Johnson." The voice on the other end was grave. "This is Mount Sinai Hospital. Your wife, Lisa Johnson, was admitted to the emergency room an hour ago. She had a car accident. We need you to come immediately." Michael's world collapsed at that instant. Is she okay? And my children?" "Your wife is in critical condition, sir. Your children are fine, with minor injuries. Please come as soon as possible." The call ended, leaving a deafening silence in the car. Michael, in shock, was having trouble breathing. It was Amanda who took the initiative. "Michael, turn here. Let's go to the hospital now." Richard, until then silent, spoke up. "I know a faster way. Take the next right." Michael, still dazed, mechanically followed the instructions. His thoughts were with Lisa and the children. How could this have happened? He should have been there with them. "My wife," Michael began, his voice broken. "She's a teacher. She must have stayed late at school, preparing her lessons. I should have gone to pick her up." Amanda placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to comfort him. "Don't blame yourself, Michael. The important thing now is to get there." Richard, feeling the weight of the situation, spoke. "I have contacts at Mount Sinai. I can make some calls. Ensure your wife receives the best possible care." Michael looked at Richard in the rearview mirror, surprised by the offer. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's the least I can do," Richard replied, his voice laden with remorse. "I've spent the whole evening behaving like a monster, while you've shown a humanity that I've clearly lost along the way." Amanda observed the scene, perceiving the transformation unfolding before her eyes. "Mr. Thompson, your actions now don't erase what happened before, but it's a start." The car accelerated through the streets of New York, now with a common purpose. The differences that had separated them moments ago seemed insignificant in the face of the gravity of the situation. Arriving at the hospital, Michael had barely parked the car before he leapt out. Richard and Amanda followed quickly. At the emergency reception, a nurse greeted them. "Mr. Johnson, your wife is in surgery. Your children are in the waiting room with a social worker." Michael ran to see his children, tears in his eyes. Tyler and Zoe, with bandages and frightened looks, threw themselves into their father's arms as soon as they saw him. Richard, keeping his promise, went to speak to the hospital administration, using his influence to ensure Lisa received all necessary care. Amanda, for her part, adopted a protective stance, taking care of the paperwork and ensuring Michael could focus on his family. Hours passed. The waiting room became a microcosm of anxiety and hope. Michael holding his children close, Richard pacing, making calls, and Amanda a strong and comforting presence. Finally, a doctor appeared. "Mr. Johnson," he called. Michael stood up, his heart in his throat. What did fate hold for his family? The doctor's answer would change everything, not only for Michael, but for all those involved in this extraordinary night. The doctor, his expression serious but not defeated, addressed Michael. "Mr. Johnson, your wife is out of surgery. It was a delicate procedure, but she's a fighter. The next 48 hours will be crucial, but we're optimistic." Michael let out a sigh of relief, tears streaming down his face. Tyler and Zoe clung to their father, not fully understanding the situation, but sensing the tension dissipating slightly. "When can I see her?" Michael asked, his voice trembling. "She's in intensive care now. You can see her soon, but only for a short while," the doctor replied. Richard, who was nearby, approached. "Doctor, I'm Richard Thompson. Is there anything more we can do to help Mrs. Johnson?" The doctor looked at Richard with surprise, recognizing the name. "Mr. Thompson, with all due respect, we're already offering the best possible treatment." Amanda, observing the scene, intervened. "The important thing now is that Mrs. Johnson receives the necessary care. Mr. Johnson, do you need anything? Someone to look after the children?" Michael, still dazed, looked at his children. I don't know. I can't leave them, but I need to see Lisa." It was at this moment that Richard surprised everyone. "I can stay with the children while you go see your wife." The silence that followed was charged with astonishment. Michael looked at Richard, then Amanda, seeking advice. Amanda, after a moment of reflection, spoke. "If you feel comfortable, Michael, I can stay here too and supervise." Michael, exhausted and emotionally drained, nodded. He knelt in front of his children. "Tyler, Zoe, Daddy needs to go see Mommy now. Can you stay with Mr. Thompson and Judge Chen for a little while?" The children, still frightened, reluctantly agreed. As Michael followed the doctor to the intensive care unit, Richard found himself facing a situation he never imagined. He, who hours earlier had been spewing racist insults, was now tasked with looking after the children he had indirectly disparaged. "So," he began awkwardly, "you must be hungry, right? How about we go to the hospital cafeteria?" Tyler, the older one, looked at Richard with suspicion, then at Amanda. She nodded encouragingly. At the cafeteria, while the children ate sandwiches, Richard found himself reflecting deeply on his actions and prejudices. He observed Tyler and Zoe, seeing in them not the color of their skin, but frightened children in need of comfort. Amanda, sitting nearby, observed the transformation unfolding before her eyes. "Mr. Thompson," she began, "do you understand now the impact that prejudicial words and actions can have?" Richard, his eyes moist, replied, I've been a fool, a dangerous and ignorant fool. How could I have been so blind?" Meanwhile, in intensive care, Michael held Lisa's hand, whispering words of encouragement. "You have to get better, my love. Our children need you. I need you." Hours passed. Day was beginning to break over New York when Michael returned to the waiting room. He found his children asleep, with Richard sitting nearby, visibly tired but alert. "How is she?" Amanda asked, rising to greet Michael. "Stable. The doctors are more optimistic now," Michael replied, exhaustion evident in his voice. Richard stood up, hesitating. "Michael, I know nothing I say can fix what I did, but I want you to know that I'm truly sorry. And I'll do whatever it takes to make amends." Michael looked at the man before him, no longer seeing the arrogant aggressor from earlier, but someone sincerely repentant and transformed by the experience. "Richard," Michael began, using his first name for the first time, "forgiveness is a long road, but recognizing your mistakes is the first step." Amanda, observing the scene, felt she was witnessing something extraordinary. A night that had begun with hatred and prejudice was ending with a profound lesson in humanity and transformation. As the sun rose over New York, illuminating the hospital room where Lisa fought for her life, the 4 adults and 2 children found themselves united by an experience that would change their lives forever. The path ahead would be long and difficult, but a seed of change had been planted. In the weeks that followed, Mount Sinai Hospital became the stage for an extraordinary transformation, not only for Lisa, who was fighting for her recovery, but for all those involved in that fateful night. Michael split his time between his work, hospital visits, and caring for the children. Exhaustion was visible on his face, but there was also a fierce determination in his eyes. Every small progress Lisa made was a celebrated victory. One day, as Michael was dozing in the chair next to Lisa's bed, he was surprised by a weak voice. "Michael!" He opened his eyes, hardly daring to believe it. Lisa had woken up and recognized him. Tears of joy streamed down Michael's face as he called for the doctors. News of Lisa's recovery spread quickly. Richard, who regularly visited the hospital, learned about it through his contacts. "Michael," Richard said, finding him in the hospital corridor, "I heard the good news. I'm truly happy for you." Michael noted the sincerity in Richard's voice. Over the past few weeks, he had witnessed a significant change in the businessman's behavior. "Thank you, Richard. Your help has been unexpected but very much appreciated," Michael replied. Richard hesitated for a moment before continuing. I've been thinking a lot about that night, about who I was and who I want to be from now on." At that moment, Amanda appeared in the corridor. She had been coming to the hospital regularly, not only to follow Lisa's case, but also to support Michael and observe Richard's evolution. "Gentlemen," she greeted them, "I see the news is good." Michael nodded, a tired but sincere smile on his face. "Lisa's awake. The doctors are optimistic." Amanda smiled, but her gaze turned to Richard. "And how are things going in your company, Mr. Thompson? Any progress on the changes we discussed?" Richard straightened up. "Yes, Judge Chen. We've launched a diversity and inclusion program. We're revising our hiring and promotion policies. It's a difficult process, but a necessary one." Michael looked at Richard in surprise. "You're really making changes in your company?" Richard nodded. "It's the least I can do. That night, well, it made me see how wrong I was, how much I was hurting people without even realizing it." Amanda observed the interaction with interest. "It's good to see that something positive is emerging from this whole situation. But don't forget, Mr. Thompson, this is an ongoing process. It's not just about policies, but about deep cultural change." "I know," Richard replied, "and I'm committed to it. Not just in the company, but in my personal life too. My daughter, she deserves a better father, a better example." Michael, hearing this, thought about his own children, about how they had handled the whole situation with surprising resilience. "Our children, they're stronger and wiser than we imagine," he reflected. Amanda smiled. "Often, they're the ones who teach us the most important lessons." At that moment, a nurse approached. "Mr. Johnson, your wife is asking to see you and the children." Michael instantly perked up. "Can I bring the children to see her?" The nurse nodded. "For a short period, yes." As Michael prepared to go get Tyler and Zoe, Richard stopped him. "Michael, I know I have no right to ask this, but would it be possible someday to speak to Lisa? I'd like to apologize to her personally too." Michael hesitated for a moment, then slowly nodded. "When she's stronger, maybe. I'll talk to her about it." Amanda, observing the scene, felt a mix of emotions. As a judge, she had seen many cases of discrimination, but had rarely witnessed such a profound transformation as Richard's. "Gentlemen," she said, "what we're seeing here is extraordinary. It's a reminder that change is possible, no matter how difficult it may seem." As Michael walked away to get his children, Richard and Amanda remained in the corridor, reflecting on the journey everyone had taken over the past few weeks. The hospital, which had initially been a place of fear and uncertainty, was now the stage for healing, not only physical, but emotional and social as well. Lisa's recovery symbolized more than just her return to health. It was a symbol of hope that even from the darkest situations something positive could emerge. For Michael, Richard, Amanda, and all those involved, it was a powerful reminder of the potential for transformation that exists in each of us. 3 months had passed since that fateful night. It was a warm May afternoon, and the spring sun bathed New York City in golden light. Lisa had been discharged from the hospital a few weeks ago and was recovering at home, surrounded by her family's love. Michael parked his car in front of an imposing building in downtown Manhattan. He adjusted his tie, uncomfortable in the suit he rarely wore. Beside him in the passenger seat, Amanda was checking some documents in her folder. "Are you sure you want to do this, Michael?" Amanda asked, her voice mixing concern and admiration. Michael took a deep breath. "I'm sure. This is bigger than me, Amanda. It's about changing things, so others don't have to go through what I did." They had been summoned for a special hearing at the state Supreme Court. The discrimination case against Richard Thompson's company had taken on unexpected proportions, becoming an emblematic case in the fight against structural racism in the workplace. Meanwhile, in an office at the top of the building, Richard Thompson looked out the window, observing the city he thought he knew so well, but now saw with new eyes. His lawyer, a middle-aged man with a worried expression, was talking incessantly about defense strategies. "Mr. Thompson, we need to consider all options. A settlement could—" Richard raised his hand, interrupting the lawyer. "No, there will be no settlement. I'm going to face this head-on." In the courtroom, people were starting to settle in. Journalists, activists, and curious onlookers jostled each other, eager to witness what promised to be a historic case. Michael and Amanda entered, followed by Lisa, who was still using a cane to walk. Their eyes met Richard's from across the room. For a moment there was a silent exchange of looks, recognition, remorse, determination. The judge entered the room, and everyone stood. "We are here today for case number 2025-7856 concerning allegations of discriminatory practices at Thompson Real Estate." As the judge spoke, Michael felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about him or Richard. It was about changing a system that had for too long turned a blind eye to discrimination. Amanda, in her role as a state court of appeals judge, and now a key witness, prepared to present the evidence she had gathered over the years. Her presence here, as a woman of Asian descent in a position of power, was itself a silent testimony to the fight against prejudice. Richard, for his part, surprised everyone by standing up before his lawyer could speak. "Your Honor, if you'll allow me, I'd like to make a statement." The judge, intrigued, nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Thompson." Richard looked directly at Michael and Lisa before turning to the judge. "I'm here today not to defend myself, but to admit my mistakes and those of my company. What happened to Mr. Michael Johnson that night was just the tip of the iceberg of a culture of discrimination that I, consciously or not, allowed to thrive." A murmur ran through the room. Richard's lawyer looked horrified, but Richard continued. "Over the past few months, I've worked to change not only my company's policies, but also my own mindset. I'm here to accept whatever penalty the court deems appropriate and to publicly commit to change." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael felt a mix of emotions: surprise, respect, and a strange sense of relief. Amanda watched carefully, recognizing the crucial moment they were experiencing. The judge, visibly impressed, spoke. "Well, this certainly changes the tone of this hearing. Mr. Johnson, Judge Chen, would you like to make a statement before we proceed?" Michael slowly stood up, feeling the weight of all the people who had suffered discrimination, of all those who hadn't had a voice. He looked at Lisa, who nodded encouragingly, then at his children, seated in the front row. "Your Honor," Michael began, his voice gaining strength with each word, "I'm here today not just for myself, but for all those who have been silenced by prejudice." The courtroom held its breath. knowing it was about to witness something truly extraordinary. The outcome of this case promised to be a turning point in the fight against racism in America. The courtroom was plunged into absolute silence as Michael continued his speech, his voice charged with emotion but firm in its conviction. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, what happened that night in my car was not an isolated incident. It was a reflection of a much larger problem that permeates our society, a problem that many prefer to ignore, but which affects millions of Americans every day. Michael paused, looking directly at Richard before continuing. But I'm not here today to accuse. I'm here to talk about change, about how a moment of darkness can transform into an opportunity for enlightenment. Amanda watched carefully, admiring Michael's eloquence and dignity. She knew this moment could not only change individual lives, but potentially influence policies and attitudes across the country. Over these past weeks, Michael continued, I've witnessed something many would consider impossible. I've seen a man acknowledge his mistakes and actively work to correct them. I've seen an entire company begin to change its culture. And most importantly, I've seen the possibility of a future where my children won't have to fear the color of their skin. Richard, visibly moved, kept his eyes fixed on Michael, absorbing every word. I'm not here to ask for punishment, Michael said, surprising everyone. I'm here to ask for action from our institutions, our companies, from each one of us, so that we can build a truly just and equal America. When Michael finished, there was a moment of stunning silence, followed by a wave of applause that resonated through the courtroom. The judge had to strike his gavel several times to restore order. Mr. Johnson, said the judge, his voice betraying an emotion rarely seen in a courtroom, your words are powerful and will be carefully considered. Mr. Thompson, do you wish to add anything? Richard stood up, his eyes moist. Only this, Your Honor. I'm ready to do whatever it takes to correct my mistakes and those of my company, not out of fear of punishment, but because it's the right thing to do. The judge nodded gravely. Given the unusual nature of this hearing, I will retire to reflect on everything that has been said here today. We will reconvene in 1 hour for my decision. During the break, the buzz in the room was intense. Journalists were rushing to file their reports. Activists were animatedly discussing the implications of the case. Michael, Lisa, and their children gathered in a quiet corner with Amanda. You were incredible, Lisa said, holding her husband's hand. Amanda smiled. Michael, your words today could have an impact far beyond this case. You should be proud. From across the room, Richard approached the group timidly. Michael, I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't seem enough. Michael extended his hand, which Richard firmly shook. This isn't about thanks, Richard. It's about action. Keep doing what's right. When the judge returned, the room fell into tense silence. Everyone anxiously awaited his decision, knowing it could set a crucial precedent. After carefully considering all aspects of this extraordinary case, the judge began, I have come to a decision that I hope will serve not only as a resolution for this specific incident, but also as a path toward broader changes in our society. The judge paused, looking directly at Michael and Richard. Mr. Thompson, your company will be fined a significant amount, which will be allocated to programs combating racism and promoting equality. Additionally, I order Thompson Real Estate to implement a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program overseen by an independent committee, which will include Mr. Johnson as a member. There was a murmur of surprise in the room. The judge continued, Mr. Johnson, your courage and compassion are exemplary. I ask you to work with Judge Chen to develop an anti-racism training program that will be implemented not only in Mr. Thompson's company, but will be recommended for adoption in companies across America. Michael and Amanda exchanged looks of amazement and determination. The judge concluded, This court finds that true justice lies not only in punishment, but in creating lasting change. Let this case serve as a turning point in our ongoing struggle for equality and mutual respect. When the gavel fell, sealing the decision, the room erupted in applause and tears. Michael hugged Lisa and his children, feeling the weight of the moment. Richard, with a mixture of relief and determination in his gaze, gave Michael a respectful nod. Amanda, observing the scene, knew this was just the beginning. The real work, the real change, was only just starting. 1 year had passed since the landmark ruling. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon in New York City, and Central Park was filled with families enjoying the day. Michael, Lisa, and their children were strolling leisurely along a park path. Lisa, fully recovered, held Emma's hand, while Tyler ran ahead, flying a colorful kite. "Dad, look who's there!" Tyler exclaimed, pointing to a group of people near the fountain. Michael looked in the direction indicated and saw Richard Thompson with his daughter Chloe. To his surprise, Amanda Chen was with them. "Shall we go say hello?" Lisa asked, smiling at her husband. Michael nodded, and the family headed towards the group. "Hello, Michael, what a pleasant coincidence," greeted Richard, his face lit up with a genuine smile. Amanda stood up to embrace Michael and Lisa. "What a pleasure to see you. We were just talking about the diversity program. The year following the ruling had been intense and transformative for everyone. The Diversity and Inclusion Program, developed by Michael and Amanda, had not only revolutionized Richard's company, but had become a model adopted by businesses across America. "How are things at the company, Richard?" Michael asked, as the children played together by the fountain's edge. Richard smiled. "Better than ever, not just financially, but the work environment. It's as if we've lifted a weight we didn't know existed. Creativity and productivity have soared." Amanda nodded. "The results have been impressive. Several other companies are contacting us to implement similar programs." Lisa, who now worked part-time on the training program, added, "It's amazing to see how people can change when given the opportunity to learn and grow." As they were talking, a group of young people approached timidly. A young girl, no older than 16, gathered her courage and spoke. "Excuse me, are you Michael Johnson and Richard Thompson? We studied your case in school. It's an inspiration to all of us." Michael and Richard exchanged surprised and moved looks. "Yes, that's us," Michael replied kindly. "I'm glad our story has reached you." Richard stepped forward. "What did you learn from our story?" Another youth from the group answered, "That change is possible, that we can overcome prejudices and build a fairer society." Amanda, observing the scene, felt a wave of hope. "This is the real impact of what we've done," she thought. The families spent the rest of the afternoon together, sharing stories, laughter, and plans for the future. As the sun set over Central Park, painting the sky in golden and pink hues, Michael reflected on the incredible journey he had experienced. From a racist incident that could have ended in tragedy, an unlikely friendship was born, a movement for change, and renewed hope for the future. Michael watched his children play with Richard's daughter and felt that perhaps they were building a better world. Lisa, noticing her husband's pensive expression, took his hand. "What are you thinking about?" Michael smiled, his eyes shining with emotion. "I'm thinking about how a dark night can turn into the brightest dawn." As the family said goodbye, promising to meet again soon, Michael was certain that their story, a story of forgiveness, transformation and hope, would continue to inspire many others. The path to a truly equal society was still long, but every step taken was a victory. And so, under the velvet sky of New York, a new page had been turned. A page of understanding, mutual respect, and the promise of a brighter future for all. 5 years later, the auditorium at Columbia University was packed. Students, professors, journalists, and activists crowded in to attend a special lecture. On stage, side by side, stood Michael Johnson and Richard Thompson. Behind them, a large screen displayed the title of the lecture, "From Conflict to Transformation, A Journey of Social Change." Michael approached the microphone, his voice calm and confident, resonating through the auditorium. 5 years ago, we were strangers united by an incident of hate. Today, we stand here as friends, partners in the fight for a more just and equal America. Richard took over. Our story proves that change is possible, both at a personal and institutional level. The program we developed has already impacted over 500 companies and touched more than 1 million workers across the country. In the front row, Lisa and Amanda watched with pride. Tyler and Emma, now teenagers, were recording the lecture on their phones, ready to share it on social media. As the audience applauded, Michael and Richard exchanged a look of mutual understanding. Their journey was a living testament that even from the darkest situations, the light of transformation can emerge. Behind them, the large screen now displayed encouraging statistics, a significant reduction in reported cases of discrimination in companies that had adopted their program, an increase in diversity in leadership positions, and testimonials from employees speaking of a profound cultural change in their workplaces. Amanda, who had played a crucial role in developing the legal aspects of the program, stood up to join Michael and Richard on stage. She spoke about the broader impact of their initiative, mentioning how it had influenced new legislation and changed the way the judicial system approached discrimination cases. Lisa, for her part, shared her experience as an educator, explaining how the program had been adapted for schools, sensitizing younger generations to the importance of inclusion and mutual respect. The lecture ended with a lively Q&A session where students and professionals asked insightful questions about the future of the fight against racism in America and around the world. As the event came to a close, Michael, Richard, Amanda, and Lisa stood side by side on stage, symbolizing unity and progress. They represented not only their own personal journeys, but also the hope of a nation evolving towards a more just and inclusive society. Michael and Richard's story, from a hate-filled encounter to a collaboration for social change, had become much more than just a news item. It was now taught in schools, cited in political debates, and continued to inspire thousands of people across the country to stand up against injustice and believe in the possibility of change. As they left the auditorium that evening, surrounded by enthusiastic students and curious journalists, Michael and Richard knew that their work was far from over. But they had the certainty that each step, each conversation, each action, however small, brought them closer to the vision of a truly equal America that they now shared. The seed of change planted on that rainy night 5 years ago had grown into a movement that was transforming lives and institutions across the nation. And as the sun set over New York City, casting long shadows across the Columbia campus, the promise of a brighter, more inclusive future seemed more tangible than ever. Dear viewers, you've just followed a powerful story of transformation and hope. A story that reminds us that change is possible even in the most challenging circumstances. But the journey doesn't end here. In fact, it's just beginning with each one of us. What can you do today to combat prejudice and promote equality in your community? How can we all work together to create a more just and inclusive world? If this story has touched you in any way, don't keep that feeling to yourself. Share it with your friends, family, and colleagues. Initiate important conversations about racism, prejudice, and the need for change. And if you've watched this far, please leave in the comments, "I watched until the end." Your participation is essential for us to continue bringing relevant content like this. Don't forget to click on the video that appears on the final screen. You'll find other inspiring stories that can help make a difference in our society. Remember, change begins with small acts of courage and compassion. Together, we can build a brighter future for all.